The mashal I had at that time in my head was life is like a train, and there is a destination where the train is meant to get to, and you can get derailed every once in a while. You get knocked down, and yeah, when you have a tragedy like that, you feel like you get knocked down, but you understand the train is moving. You understand where the train has to get to, and you have to get back on the track.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Stark Tank, the podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. This week, we sit down with Rav Reuven Berman, who started out his career in chinuch. He landed what looked like a dream job offer to make Aliyah, come to Yerushalayim, and teach Torah. But pretty soon after arriving in Israel, he realized that the numbers just weren't adding up. He needed more income. Already in his 30s and with 5 kids, he embarked on a career in business. We speak about the importance of teaching Torah, emunah when things get rough, the importance of shul, and more. A quick reminder to head over to starktank.org for exclusive written content, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a post. My name is Yaakov Wolf, and this is Stark Tank. Reuven Berman, welcome to Shark Tank. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
So you started out your career as a mechanech, a rebbe, an avrech in kollel for a while. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background, your upbringing, and sort of that early career journey that you embarked on.
Sure. So I grew up, I guess, somewhat typical modern Orthodox YU type of upbringing. I went to MTA, then went for 2 years to Israel, and then came back to YU. And at some point along the way, probably around my Shana Aleph or Shana Bet, somewhere in there, was pretty much decided that I wanted to go into chinuch. I think took me some time to be comfortable with that decision. So at some point along the way, I made the decision that I was going to go into chinuch and was exploring that path and would seek out various teaching opportunities while learning at Kollel and YU. He was on, I would say, the Rabbanus track, the pulpit track at YU, was applying to a few places. And somewhat out of the blue, although I was considering moving to Israel, I got offered a job to teach, to be Rebbe at Eish Gesher. And my wife and I decided, well, it sounds like a great opportunity to make Aliyah. We actually have a job in Israel. My wife was going to be teaching as well part-time. And we went. We made some quick calculations, or perhaps miscalculations, figured that it would work financially, and just went for it. Pretty quickly, and definitely by the end of the first year, it was clear to us that given the lifestyle that we had living in Yerushalayim, the one full-time salary and one part-time teaching salary in Israel, we're not going to cover it. At that point, I reached out to my brother-in-law, Eric Distenfeld, is a well-connected guy. I said, hey, Eric, I need some help here. I need a way to make some more money. He put me in touch with a friend of his who happened to own the business, happened to know one of the co-owners of the company back from when I was in MTA, and he was in YU. And called him up. He said, kind of settled down a little bit. I was moving at the time. And he said, call me when you're ready. And 6 months later, so this is now halfway through my second year of teaching. Actually, our 5th child was born just then. I think it was my first day at work was the day after the bris. It was time. And I started working part-time in sales. What this meant was that I would teach in the old city in the morning. I would go to Efrat in the afternoon for a few hours and work. I would come back to the yeshiva for night seder. Sometimes I was able to get lunch or dinner at home, but not always. And then I would teach all nights, work at nights, teaching at nights. And then I would put in some nights a couple more hours late night for the business, Fridays for the business. And it was really just a crazy schedule. There were many positives to it, which we can come back to. But ultimately, after another year and a half, so now I've been teaching 3 years and a year and a half doing business on the side. It was clear that I couldn't continue this way. My life was just too crazy for me and for my family. I had to make a decision. And at that point, and we could talk about what that decision was like, it was a somewhat painful decision, but not a hard decision as far as what was the right thing to do. I had to make the decision to go full-time into business. Since then, I have had some opportunities to teach, which we could talk about. And I've enjoyed that very much. But my primary occupation, my full-time occupation since then, which is, we're talking now the summer of 2019, has been in the business world.
Got it. And when you got that call to come and make Aliyah and have a position, you mentioned that you made a quick calculation or maybe not exactly a thorough enough job researching it. Do you think that you were too quick to jump at it? Were you so starstruck by the possibility of having this perfect package of Aliyah and a job waiting for you in the American chinuch world? You may take me back to that moment in retrospect, and what are the lessons you learned from that?
Yeah, in retrospect, I think it really started before that moment because even as I was going into smicha and into rabbanos, I remember my parents would ask me every once in a while, how are you going to make a living? Are you going to be able to make a living in rabbanos? And my answer at that stage of my life always was, yeah, well, I look around and I see other rabbis making a living, and I'm sure it'll work out one way or another. And so I never really had what we'd call a clear plan. Thank God we had financial support from my parents and in-laws, not in an extreme way, but there was always support together with whatever money we were making that we were able to be comfortable in a small apartment in Washington Heights, but we were able to be comfortable those years. And so it wasn't like I had to strain really to try to really crunch the numbers and figure it out. So I guess when that Aliyah question came, I kind of did a similar thing. I asked a few people and they said, yeah, it's okay. And probably misunderstood some comments that were made by some people in Israel about what it took, to make it. But yeah, that was for me. That was the process, for better for worse. That was what it was, and that brought us to Eretz Yisrael. And once we were here, we loved it, and there was very little turning back. Especially my wife said, "No way, we're going back to America." So that's where the shift took place.
Got it. So let's talk a little more about that shift, about those difficult moments of making the decision to really step out of the full-time teaching role into the full-time business role. What were the emotions like for you? How do you sort of think about the identity shift from being the Rebbe most of the day to being the Rebbe maybe part-time here or there?
Yes, I had the luxury of transitioning gradually. I'll start with the decision to start working part time in business. So at that point, like I said, it kind of became clear we needed to bring in some more money to support the family. It wasn't a very hard decision. I was teaching in the mornings. I'd go home. I'd spend some time with my family. I'd learn a little bit, and then go back for a night seder. And it was an amazing, amazing year and a half. But it wasn't like I had to give up a huge amount. My family had to sacrifice a little more. I was around much less, but they understood you had to make a living. So that kind of decision was not very difficult. And I had my Rebbe also help me in that. Rebbe is Sobolovsky. I was in his year for many years at YU, and he was visiting Eretz Yisrael just around the time that I was going to start working. And I said to him, I told him about the situation. I said, I really need to make a little more money to support my family, and so I'm going to be starting working in a business in the afternoons. I'm still teaching mornings and nights, and I'll be in the afternoons in the business. And I never forget, we were in the lobby of the yeshiva building, and he said to me without hesitation, of course, like I wasn't really asking him a question because I knew from everything he had taught me over the years, and I think what's pushed at the halacha that you have to support your family. It wasn't something that I was, you know, didn't have much doubt about. But the way he answered was so encouraging that yeah, of course you have to make a living. And then I spoke to other rebbeim of mine who were very encouraging in general about the idea that yeah, it's wonderful to teach, but it's also great to have another source of income, and you don't feel like teaching is only a parnasa vehicle, and it could be a little bit more lishma. So there's a lot of positive, I guess, that I got from various rebbeim of mine at that point, and so that was not a particularly difficult decision. And as far as identity, I definitely felt as my identity was a rebbe. I was really there the majority of the day. I definitely spent more hours a week working there, and I was close to the rebbeim, and it didn't feel like it was a big shift. Just like my break, instead of being at home with a little learning in the base Spanish, in my local base Spanish, I was going to work, and I felt very good about it. As that time, and Baruch Hashem, the business went well. My book of business, is a sales position, so I was just growing, and it became overwhelming. I really had to move full time at that point to the business, and like I said earlier, the schedule was crazy. At that point, I realized towards the end of that year, heading towards the end of the year in yeshiva teaching, that I had to make the decision, and the decision was pretty obvious to me because I had to support my family, and I didn't really see a path going the yeshiva route. And I had this path kind of already handed to me. Essentially, I built it up pretty, much on the side. So as I was approaching that decision, I had this pit in my stomach. Like, I can't believe I'm not going to be teaching. I'm not going to be in chinuch. I'm not going to be in the. I think I was a little less worried about the world of the base Spanish, which we'll come back to. But it's just the idea that I was leaving that was difficult. But I understood it, and I was able to just kind of persevere, push through, and yes, you get a feeling in your stomach, but you can deal with that. And so I made that decision at that time. Actually, just around the same time, I got the opportunity. I was offered to teach a chabura for the Smichas Chaver program, which probably has been discussed at some point in this podcast. I haven't listened to all the episodes, only some, but I was asked to give a chabura, and that was actually great because my work schedule was pretty all over the place. I was working, it was an international business, and so some days I was working in the morning, some days at night, and it was hard to make a real chabrusa. So actually having the chiyuv to teach, to really put together the shir, that was machayev for me to spend time learning that. And that was my limud for that period. That was for 2 years. And I really enjoyed that. And that gave me an opportunity to still stay a little bit of teaching and keep me learning. And so the transition was not very difficult because I had been kind of used to this hybrid model a little bit, and nothing wasn't a big shift. It wasn't like I moved to a new office or a new city or a totally new environment. Thank God the working environment I was in was a good overall, not I would call it yeshivish environment at all, but it was, from people. And so it really, that was not a difficult transition. Around that time, I don't know exactly, I think that's when Lopiansky's Sefer came out, the Torah for Life. I don't know if I bought it or someone bought it for me just around that time. And I read it that summer as I was leaving the yeshiva and going full-time business. And definitely there were some pieces there that were very helpful. But one of the things I remember he speaks about is the way you dress. And it doesn't matter, if you're more quote unquote Haredi in your dress or less Haredi. I think it's pretty clear. Everyone in yeshiva, whatever yeshiva you're in, there's a little different dress than the street dresses. And so he spoke about the importance of maintaining your dress. In other words, as much as you could keep the same, keep the same. So I didn't change shuls. I didn't change my dress. And no, I didn't because, and it helped obviously that I had the gradual transition. So I guess that's some issues around the identity feelings at that time.
Right. So it's interesting. I mean, I want to maybe connect what you just said in that last answer to some of the earlier things we were talking about, which is the fact that on the one hand, you had a hashkafic framework which said that working and being in business is a completely normal and respectable thing to do. And then Stam, to transition abruptly from one very specific type of lifestyle to a very different one can be difficult. So having that transition on a practical level was helpful, but but those two things together is really what made it work. It's not, you really need both. You need to have the understanding that working is totally fine, and just practically to be able to ease into it and not to just go very abruptly from one to the other.
Yeah, I think that is correct. I think another piece of it is, again, in hashkafa is not changing. Oh, I would say also my father is a very good role model for this. My father's a doctor and has been learning very seriously since I was young. He got more into learning as I was kind of entering my teenage years, but he's been learning very seriously. He went to Shir YU for a number of years, and he gives Daf Yomi Shirim, and he is a Ben Aliyah in the true sense. And so seeing that as a model is something that's very important. But one thing I always loved about my father's perspective, and I try to continue that, is that I don't think there has to be this sense of there's one track of I'm in yeshiva, and that's one stage. I don't call it stage in life, or like you kind of turn that off, and now I go to work. I still wish I could be in yeshiva full time, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But that doesn't mean I'm living a b'diavad life. I don't have to feel like, oh, everything's terrible because I'm not in yeshiva. I like to make 3 categories. I don't know, I made this up, but there's you're living a life of a ben Torah. You're trying to grow. You're supporting your family. I don't know anyone who could call that a b'diavad life. That's a lechatchila life. That's an ideal lifestyle. It doesn't mean there can't be something even more ideal. Lechatchila sh'lechatchila. Wow, if I could learn 3, all day long, amazing. It was so great those years I was learning or teaching, whatever it is. And there's nothing wrong. You can't drive yourself crazy always dreaming of it because that would be unhealthy. But I don't think there's anything wrong with with thinking about that or having that idealism. And also, which allows you to tap into those opportunities when they come. If you have a week off from work or you have the opportunity to daven in an environment, sometimes people are in a rush. They daven in a slower minyan, or in a faster minyan, or their circumstances put them in a minyan that's not their optimal place. Okay. But when I have the opportunity to plug into that, I do. So I think having that perspective, and my father always emulated that, having kind of he would leave his office as a doctor and come to YU to learn and just daven mincha and take in like a beautiful davening, even though some days he was in the hospital and had to daven a quick mincha. And so having that, I think is also helpful as far as the transition.
That's very interesting. I'll actually maybe push back, go a little deeper into this, because I've heard it in different people say it in different ways, similar sentiments to the way that you just described it. I once heard one Rav describing, the Baal Batim versus the Kol guys as like, so the Kol guy will get shlishi, and the balabas will get revi or chamishi, but they're both getting aliyahs within the same laning, or various formulations where there's lechatchila, which is fine, and then there's even more lechatchila. And I don't know, I have a hard time with that insofar as like there can only be like, if you're not living the top uh form of life, then on a certain level there's a b'diavad there, which you sort of indicated might be true. Maybe just focusing on the positive of the because it's a scale. There's better and there's worse. But like I don't know, I've sort of had a hard time with people who say there's like lechatchila and then there's even more lechatchila. So maybe you could give me some chizuk on that and explain a little more about how that can really make sense.
So I'll tell you two aspects or two thoughts about it. Perhaps part of this is informed by a conversation I overheard that was very troubling. For those who know in YU, so there's the beit midrash mincha, which is a really long, yeshiva mincha, and then there's a mincha in the library building, which is connected to the beit midrash, and that's a pretty quick mincha. And I heard it was actually a rabbi, which is I guess even more disappointing. But I heard a rabbi almost like making fun of how long the davening was in the beit midrash. Now, I'm not saying every person needs to spend 18 minutes or 20 minutes on their mincha. I completely respect that you're not in the headspace for that. You're not in whatever, you're busy. But how can you look at that with a like disdain or make fun of that is beautiful. To daven that way, to daven the rebbeim and daven in such an environment is a beautiful thing. And so that was a big turnoff to me. It almost felt like a person in their mind was, I'm not a yeshiva guy right now, and therefore that's like, put that down. That's a bit where I'm coming from as far as the perspective. Like I don't think anyone who's davening a faster mincha has to feel they're living like this bad life, and that the only way that's a really lechatchila is daven in yeshiva. But that doesn't mean that you can't say, wow, wouldn't it be beautiful if every once in a while I could daven in such an environment? So that's a little bit where I'm coming from. The other perhaps the line there, Aaron Cutler is famous for having said that someone was going to leave Lakewood and just explain to Aaron why he had to go to make a parnasa and go to work and whatever it was. And Aaron said, like, you're right. I have no questions about your olam haba. Your olam haba is, you're going to get it. No doubt. He's like, but what about your olam hazeh? And I think that's a part of it. Like I'm not saying what's in Shamayim, what's better. To olam hazeh of sitting and being able to learn. Work is not easy. It's not the most, I enjoy what I do, and we can talk about that aspect of it also. But, to sit and learn and to be in an environment of growth and is a wonderful olam hazeh experience. So I guess those two stories are what inform, I think, my comments there. I don't know if that helps you in your feelings about it, but that's I don't, the Shlishi Revi, story bothers me. Like, I don't think that's true because that you're playing God then. I don't think anyone should be playing God, like I said before in the Ron Cutler story. In Shemayim, I have no idea. I have no idea where everyone's ranked in Shemayim. But there's something beautiful about being able to be osek full time in Hashem and Torah and not be bogged down in the nitty gritty things of business, which may be enjoyable and may be positive, but are not quite the same.
Right. I mean, I don't remember if this is explicit or between the lines of Lopiansky's Sefer, and a lot of what the conversations we have on this podcast is really that tension and that maybe contradiction between, on the one hand, saying that life in yeshiva is the best, and also saying that life as all of us is lechatchila. So Lopiansky talks about Shevet Levi and Shevet Levi different parts of your life and different formulations and frameworks. And it's I think the question is sometimes maybe a little better than the answer, but I certainly appreciate those insights as well.
Yeah, I guess I formulate a little bit differently than Lopiansky does, but the same direction as far as being able to appreciate the different aspects.
Right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your career so far. We'll start specifically with the Ruchni parts of your career. So maybe talk a little bit about your connection to learning as you've been full-time in the business world. And maybe also you spoke about teaching and the importance of teaching. We had some offline conversations about the importance of teaching as well. So maybe you could share how you've experienced that specifically in the time where you've been full-time business.
Yeah, so I will say that, first of all, I found that there are still challenges, even with learning and teaching and whatever we're about to say. I just want to preface that there is, for me at least, there's still been plenty of challenges, and perhaps in some ways, and maybe I justify it, but some ways, certain letting down of the guard a little bit as far as maybe how much on top of, how much you're careful with every moment of your time, or how many other things. I mean, I think probably people in business can relate to this. Like when you're learning full time, you're in kollel, like who's paying attention to the news, the sports? You're not looking at anything other than your Gemara. So like, why would you go look at anything? You don't need to look at anything else. when you're in the business world, so you are engaged by definition, in most businesses with the broader world. You're bumping to all kinds of things and things that are not necessarily bad. There's sometimes bad things out there, but they're just part of things that are distracting. And I think that some of the things that I may talk about or may come across my mind today are different than when I was in yeshiva full time. And so that's, I get a bit of a disclaimer for everything I'm going to say, that I think that those are real changes that people undergo. And yes, there is a beautiful, they're beautiful inspirational stories of the, various gedolim who like were thinking and learning all day long, and they were taking advantage of every second. They just put in what they needed to for their business. I don't know. I've also found like that you need to invest in your business to do well in your business. So you can't really say, I'm not going to think about it. I'm just going to plug in and do some work for a few hours and leave. You need to invest in it to do it well. So that's, as far as a general kind of preface about what life looks like overall. That being said, as far as, the ruchni side of things, as I said earlier, I would say as kind of the structure of my life, I've tried not to make it very different. I live, Baruch Hashem, in a community, remote, it was mentioned, but remote bed, which is has a whole range, has a whole range of shuls. But my shul, I've continued down in the same shul, whether I was teaching full time or in business. And it's a very strong environment. It's mostly Israeli, Israeli Avreichim type of shul, actually. But I really enjoy it. My kids enjoy it. And in that regard, I don't feel like the kind of the, shul really and minyanim structure your life in a large way. So that part hasn't really fundamentally changed. I've always tried to be involved in either learning or teaching. And so depending on what's been available, I mentioned the opportunity to teach in the Smichas Chaver. After 2 years, my work hours shifted and actually was working U.S. hours exclusively. And all of a sudden I felt, the teaching is okay, but I had the opportunity to really learn a morning Seder. And when I do that, and I actually went back to Grus for a while, for half a year, and I was going to Shir. I was learning beit and Cheskas Abatim, and that was enjoyable. And I was able to tap in. And then soon after that, I was asked to teach while you had a program. I started teaching, and then went back to learning, and so kind of would seek out various opportunities. Then I had a chavrusa, and then my chavrusa got a job, so I didn't have a chavrusa anymore. But then I got a call from MMY, actually, where my wife was teaching, and that this was during the war. This is back in 2003, 23. That one of their rebbeim was in Miluim, and I started teaching there. So for the last year and a half, actually till just a month ago, I was teaching there 3 days a week in the morning, Hilchos Shabbos, and that kept me busy. Either being busy with teaching or having kvias with chavrusas, that has been kind of, either way, that forces you to be committed, because you got to teach, you got to prepare. You have a chavrusa, you got to be there for your chavrusa. And so finding ways to make sure you're able to anchor yourself down, to me, has been the key to success in the ruchnius. And now, actually, I transitioning out of that because I stopped teaching and my work career has gotten a little busier. So I now went back to the chavrusa route. So I have a couple chavrusas in the mornings. So far, so good.
And it's interesting what you mentioned about the minyanim and the shul being a fundamental part. A lot of olim and Anglos have a hard time with the lack of community that they're maybe used to in Chutz La'aretz, and the lack of a full-time Rav and assistant Rav, and all of the wonderful infrastructure that exists in America and the tri-state area. So can you tell us a little more about why specifically that minyan has been an anchor for you, or maybe how olim and Anglos should rethink their relationship to their shul to still have it be a cornerstone without expecting some of the other frills or other things?
That's a good question. I'll take a broader step back for a moment to answer that question. My attitude, and this is just maybe God gave me this gift, but my attitude in general has been to not to complain about your situation. In other words, and I'll take it way back. You have a lot of guys go to yeshiva in Israel. And in Eretz Yisrael, they have a smaller environment. They're very close to their rebbeim, and their rebbeim are very warm with them. And then they come to YU or Eretz Yisrael or wherever it might be that they're going next. And all of a sudden, they're in a big yeshiva with their rebbeim who are big Talmidei Chachamim, who are not like as close with them as their rebbeim were in Eretz Yisrael. So many guys I used to talk to when I was at that stage who would be complaining and lamenting and missing. And I would say, yes, you had that over there, but take a look at what you have here, and take advantage of this opportunity. And so, and not only point to take advantage, but what good does it do you to complain and wish for something that's not going to happen? So as an attitude, yes, are there certain things about shuls in America? I grew up in Yerushalayim, I mentioned. I was very close. I still am close to the Rav. and he's Rabbi Fink, who's a major presence and a big Talmid Chacham. That's amazing. But I don't have to live my life always lamenting and wishing it should be that way. I found the shul that I got to in Ramot that had a beautiful davening. For me, a serious davening was what I needed. Serious davening and serious learning. And yeah, are there certain things that are missing? We have a Rav who comes on Shabbos sometimes, and is there a little less schmoozing because I don't have the same background as the people there? Sure. And you find other ways to fill in having Rebbeim. I, Baruch Hashem, have good relationship with Rebbeim, and I call my Rebbeim, and I've developed relationships with other Rebbeim in Eretz Yisrael. And my friends I connect with friends in other ways. I don't need the shul to exactly be the model for those things. That's my, some people I understand, they just can't handle that. They need a shul with a kiddush and a chevra and fun. And I'm not judging that. Uh, but as an attitude, and what's worked for me is to just seek out what's good. And if you don't get everything good there, get those other good things that you want in a different place. And so in that, I guess that's been my approach to it.
I think that's a remarkable approach and very important one because a lot of us, especially in yeshiva, we dream of that perfect community and the perfect setup and everything, and it's very nice to dream of that. But the real life very often does not allow us for the full packages that we would have want. So we try to get the most check boxes in the as you correctly pointed out, and then important to not give up on the other things, but find alternative solutions. So I really like that a lot. The other thing that you were speaking about before, as far as your ruchnius, is the learning and the teaching, and you've sort of done a little bit of both. Teaching, you mentioned to be an interesting opportunity that you had to hear from a great man about the importance of teaching, and specifically how it relates to the attitude and the mindset and the influences of the outside world. So can you share that with us?
Yes, I'll come back to that. I just wanted to make one last point about the different, if it's okay, about the different boxes and filling different boxes different ways. I give full credit to that perspective to Rav David Miller, Rosh Kol Grus. This is going back 15 years when I was in Grus. And I started talking to him then. I just had one young son and started talking to him about what my life should look like, the types of communities I should look for, the types of schools I should look for my kids. And I used to pick his brain about like his decision-making process. And he told me very early on, he said, when you're picking a school, your attitude to the school is, okay, I am a parent and I want to educate my kids. And I have all these values I want to give my kids. Make a whole list. Right? If you want to write it out, great, write it out. And no parent could give everything on their own. No school can provide everything. And is you just aware of that. And you just think, okay, which school is going to partner with me to give the most to my kids? And that's going to be different for everyone because every person is going to be different. There's no right or wrong here. Some people are going to feel like they could do certain things at home and need the school for some aspects, and other people feel like they want the school to give aspects and they want to give different aspects at home. So that I guess I never thought about it, but when you phrase it the way you phrase it, I guess I've carried that attitude to other parts of my life. So I'm really grateful to Miller for that. As far as your question, so yes, when I was teaching at Aish, we had this chus to take the group to Ashdod to the previous Pittsburgher Rebbe Zatzal, who was actually from Pittsburgh, and we had a Talmud from Pittsburgh, and it was great to see him schmoozing and chatting with him about different locations and different streets in Pittsburgh, and that was a lot of fun. And we had an amazing time, and he was just so great with the guys, and he sang with everyone. It was really incredible. But the one I remember, it was towards the end of the year, and some of the guys were going back to America, and he said, "Remember what Chazal say." And I don't think it's explicit in Chazal, but it's the Rishonim speak out in a number of places. It's brought down the Torah Yeridea of a Yesod in Hilchos Blios of the Tam, transferring from one thing to the other. So the Yesod goes, "I did the Tarach lemiflat lo bola." So as something is being pole Tam, if something is busy, in one of the examples, the Torah talks about a piece of meat that's being roasted over the fire. So it's polate tam. Tam is going out of the meat as it's over the fire. So if it's busy giving out tam, it's not going to absorb tam. So that context is absorbing blood. And so he said to the guys, when you go back to America, make sure you're always putting out Torah. You're sharing Divrei Torah. You're always thinking about giving Divrei Torah, because if you're always putting things out, you're not going to absorb the things that are the bad things that are in the environment around you. And so, yeah, I would say that I'm not going to say that you don't absorb anything and it's not perfect. It's not like I'm full-time teaching, obviously. I'm and not all of my day is done teaching, but I would say that, being involved in teaching for me, I enjoyed it. Like I spoke about earlier, it has given me I found it to be a powerful tool to not, I don't know as much as of absorbing the outside world, but of like maybe sinking into a shifted mindset or self-identity like you described. Like I'm going out, I'm going out to teach, I'm thinking about teaching, I'm preparing, that keeps that identity uh, of not, I guess, of being the chinuch or being the Torah world. I'm not sure how much this maramakom is saying the same thing, perhaps, but the Mishnah Pirkei Avos, which is udula mosif yosef. If you're not going to increase, you will be gone. And the mashal I always used to give for that was that life is like an upward escalator. You're climbing up an escalator that's coming down, and if you don't keep on growing, it's gonna pull you down. And that's life. We can't take the attitude of like, oh, here I am, I'm good. Kadosh Baruch Hu wants us to always to seek out continued growth, and there could be so many different forms. And so teaching, it just may be a better vehicle because that other maramakum of idea Torah miflat lobala, but it's a way of always pushing, of always growing, and always trying to accomplish that. That is helpful as far as continuing to grow in life.
Right, and I never actually thought of this until I heard you talking about it and trigger this idea, which is that on the one hand, the act of teaching can obviously be very, very motivating, as you correctly described. The Rambam in the end of Hilchos Yisurei Bia, he says that the machshavos of znus can only rest in a heart, which is, I believe the lashon is panim and achachma, if the heart is empty and not filled with wisdom. So I'm just wondering broadly, if you had to compare teaching on a lower level or learning bechavrusa on a higher level, broadly speaking, which one of those do you think would be for you maybe more enticing?
That's a good question. So far, all the teaching I've done has required me to prepare. So as far as that maramakom and in general, like the push, the need to prepare things is what just drives you, and maybe too much because I've taken up drinking coffee in the last year and a half, which I never did before because the preparation actually can keep you up pretty late if you're not ready. It's not as much about level per se. Hopefully, any good mechanech, and this is not a podcast right now about being about chinuch, but I hope any mechanech is really actually Rabbi Rosner. I spoke about this a little bit about really preparing very well. And even if you're not going to teach everything, but do your best to really prepare and know what you're talking about, and then you teach whatever you think is appropriate to teach. And so, as long as the preparation is at a high level, I think that's what's most important for your question. I do think it's probably the case that if you get to the point of teaching where it's just like by road, it's the same thing I taught all the time, and there's probably a similar danger of what we spoke before of not like continuing to grow, where you just kind of slide down. So and probably at that point you're more like a working person who needs to find ways to continue to grow if you're just going through the motions of teaching because it's a repeat from the year before. But yeah, so those are some thoughts on that topic.
Right, and we did have Rabbi Rosner talk about his approach to preparation that he got from his father on the recent episode, so we can link to that and people can check back to that as well. The next sort of topic within Ruchnius, and we still have a lot to cover here. We'll see how much we get to, but I guess I would define it as tefillah, which you talked about a little bit before, and emuna, which is connected but different. So maybe talk a little bit about those two concepts, those two ideas, and how they've played out for you in this last kufa of your life.
Yeah, I'll start with Emuna. I think that for me, Emuna has meant an understanding and a clarity of what my tachlis in life is. And I don't mean to see like where is my unique contribution. Broadly speaking, we're here to be Oved Hashem. We're here to raise a family, and I'll use a phrase I hear one of the people Rebbe of mine I don't get a chance to speak to very, very infrequently I get to speak to him, but he's been my big ashpaz, Rabbi Daniel Kalish. And Rabbi Kalish likes to say that you're raising a family of loyalists to Hashem. So the mission of raising a family of loyalists to Hashem, the mission of Avodas Hashem, to me, that's what I think drives me. Having Rebbeim and having seen big people and the way they live their life has always been a big inspiration. Has kind of informed what my life should look like in that regard. And so that means, no matter what happens, I have a mission. I guess it's a good opportunity. Perhaps you mentioned just relates to it. You asked me offline. We did have a tragedy in our life 5.5 years ago. Fifth son, actually, the first son that was born in Eretz Yisrael passed away at a little over 2. We don't have time for all the details of that story and a lot of the lessons that were learned. But one thing that stuck with me at that time was the feeling, the mashal I had at that time in my head was life is like a train, and there is a destination where the train is meant to get to, and you can get derailed every once in a while. You get knocked down, and yeah, when you have a tragedy like that, you feel like you get knocked down, but you understand the train is moving. You understand where the train has to get to, and you have to get back on the track. And that's to me, that's I guess what's informed my life. That we know what we're supposed to do. or Nevinsel. I heard many times. I was in Akotel, so Baruch Hashem, got to hear a lot from Nevinsel. But he spoke about in general, like Am Yisrael is on a path towards the Geula. And he speaks a lot around Rosh Hashanah time that our decision of Malchus is a decision. Are we going to, or talks about this more, the Shofars actually. The Shofars talks about Mashiach coming. Mashiach's going to come one way or another. Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to be Goel us. Are we going to be part of that? Are we going to help bring that about? Or are we just going to sit on the side and see it happen? And so, in an individual perspective as well, like we know what we need to do. And to me, that's what's driven me. And that's why, I guess, part of why it maybe even relates to the whole question we discussed before about shuls and rabbis. The details, well, I don't want to say don't matter. Of course, the details matter, but I can't get bogged down by now I'm left through base finish to work, or, oh, the shul's not perfect, or this, that. I have a mission. We have a mission in life, and we have to stay true to that mission. As far as tefillah, for me, I mean, I think I wish I could be a little better in davening as far as kind of connecting emotionally. I do. It's never been the easiest for me. Baruch Hashem, I'm able to slow it down and daven slowly and, try to say the words as slowly as I can and not be someone who gets bothered by too slow of a minyan. That's generally not, sometimes I'm rushed and I have to go to the fast minyan. It doesn't work out. But for me personally, it's been more in line of like, this is the structure of Yiddishkeit. This is Avodas Hashem, what it's supposed to look like, and have to be part of that path. So I don't have any great inspiring answer, but that's kind of the way that I've taken to life.
Interesting. With regards to Emunah and the mission in life, and you also sort of mentioned the getting bogged down in the nitty gritty. I'm wondering, there does seem to be some confusion or some things that people aren't so clear on as regards to their mission in life. I think, from my view, sometimes it can stem from maybe the different approaches in Chutz La'aretz, which maybe has a different mindset than the Israel, especially the Tilumi world, which takes a broader historical view of our nationhood and stuff like that. And then there's between the Haredi world and the yeshiva, and people who are in yeshiva. So there's a little bit of like that, Torah Lishma. So do you think that people overcomplicate it when they start getting maybe a little bit confused about their religious identity and their tafkid in life and their mission? Is there more common ground between those different sects that I mentioned that we should really be focusing on, or is the confusion maybe justified and you have to sort of work through that in order to have that clarity as to where your train is going, and that way you can make sure that even when there are derailments, you're getting back on track?
Yeah, I mean, the chinuch from my various rebbeim, and I've listened a lot to Rav Biansky, especially in recent years, the things he has on podcasts, and like I said, Rabbi Kalish, and then other the rebbeim I had at YU. The message of the Yud Beis Shvatim is very powerful. There are different pathways in Avodas Hashem that people connect feel more comfortable in different places, and that's totally fine. And that's Kadosh Baruch Hu offers different tracks for different people, and I think the answer is yes. Like the common denominator is and should be there's Shulchan Aruch, there's mitzvos, there's what we're supposed to be engaged in. And yes, there are going to be differences, and people have different paths, and things will look different for different people, and that's okay. The common denominator is we are all in this, on this path of serving Hashem, of doing the mitzvos, and as far as raising a family and community, of being committed to Hashem. Those should be our ideals. And what that looks like and what's emphasized for different people is legitimate. So, I mean, personally it is, but I know that that's hard for people. And sometimes, people get prioritize certain thing over another. But that was never the chinuch from my rebbeim. I mean, it's just not something that I picked up from the rebbeim that I've been close with over the years. And it's a spectrum. Like I said, it's very much been that way of, do try to seek out what Hashem wants, and it's okay if it looks different for different people.
Got it. And I do want to maybe ask you to reflect a little bit more on the terrible tragedy. You gave a very beautiful mashal of getting back on the tracks, and I'm sure everyone in their lives has these different points where they get a little bit derailed, smaller things, bigger things, and obviously the response is going to be different for everyone. But I'm wondering if you have any insights as to the skill of getting back on track based on your experiences that you want to share with us.
Yeah, so I would say the first step is getting back on track, like I said, and it relates to some of the things I said earlier. In that, uh, you know, maybe I'll share my favorite word I ever heard from. I don't ever, but one of my favorite words from my Rebbe. It's okay if I say a little word, and hopefully it doesn't take too long. But very quickly, at the end of Parshas Bo, so there's a pasuk that says, "So you keep this chukah miyamim yamima." And there's machlokas in the Gemara. which chukah it is, because the previous psukim are talking about either carbon pesach or tefillin, and the yamim yamima is either day to day or year to year. And Rasaboski wanted to say in Hashkafa, they're both true, that we need to be shomer the chukah of the daily chukah, the tefillin, day in, day out consistency, not necessarily always the most exciting thing, but day in, day out consistency. What at the same time, our avodas Hashem can't only be the day in, day out consistency. We need to have those moments of excitement, the year to year, the carbon pesach, those moments of big inspiration. And vice versa. If you just had big inspiration and you expected everything in avodas Hashem to be very inspiring, that's not what Hashem wants from us. There's also a day-to-day commitment that the tefillin represent. And so, my perspective on that moment, in those times were, you can't get, in the same way that I described earlier, sometimes you can't always need to be on a high, and you can't get too high about the highs. You also can't get too low about the lows. Like, Hashem wants us to be committed, and we have a path, and we know where we're going. And that's going to mean some days will be amazing and feel great. Some days won't feel as great, but it doesn't change the path. That's one. I'll add on a deeper and perhaps more inspirational level. Shiva was an incredible experience, obviously very painful. Anyone who's learned Mesilas Yesharim knows that almost every parak in Mesilas Yesharim ends, how do you work on this? Be misbonein. If you spend time thinking about it, you'll be able to get it. And one of the unfortunate realities is that we are not very good at this. At least I'm speaking for myself. I was just talking to a friend of mine, and we were talking about trying to be misbonein on this whole situation and the rockets and from Iran and this whole war. And we both kind of said, we're so busy and we don't even know how to think about things in the right way. And it's very hard to figure out what exactly we should be thinking about. And that is a major challenge. One of the brachas of Shiva is that you're not allowed to work, you're not allowed to learn, you're not allowed to go out, you're not allowed to take care of anything. Mamish have no responsibilities. And so naturally, you find yourself thinking a lot, obviously a lot of painful things. But Chazal are incredible as far as what they describe, the first 3 days of Shiva and the last 3.5 days of Shiva. So I felt myself as Shiva was going on, my thoughts were moving away from the tragedy, or I was leaving a little bit of the pain and more reflecting on the whole situation. And I was able to find so many brachos in the tragedy. And, the image I had at the time was, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was slapping you, but he's hugging you at the same time. And so I think it's probably true always. I've never gotten back to that level of reflection on things, although I've had moments to be able to reflect. But if we really, really think about our lives and we reflect, actually, to be honest, I just listened to a podcast interview of Omer Shem Tov, was done on Inspiration for the Nation. And he spoke about this. Omer Shem Tov said this is what he did in the tunnels when he was in a hostage. He literally was misboning on all the good things that he had and expressed his appreciation to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for all the good things, and then proceeded to daven. But the point is, if we reflect on things, even when things are not going well, there are so many brachos Hashem gives, and you talk all kinds of divrei Torah about that, which we don't have time for. But it's that was, as far as, besides the train muscle of just staying on the track, but also when you think about it a little bit, you realize how much HaKadosh Baruch Hu is really loves you and is just. We don't understand why he does things, or we're never going to understand why, but we can see his love through those amazing things that are happening at the same time.
Right. I mean, just briefly, you described realizing brachos within the tragedy and a hug along with the slap. It's hard, just on an abstract level to understand what that is. Can you give us a brief example as to what one of those realizations was?
I'll give you some, a whole bunch of specifics that I thought about over the course of Shiva. But going back to it, my son passed away in his crib on Shabbos afternoon. So you think about, what if he would be in daycare, and what kind of trauma that would be that was in daycare, and we didn't know, and we didn't see, and we didn't find him, and the woman who took care of him. And then my kids were outside of the house; they didn't really have to see. We were able to get them out before the Hatzalah guys came. And actually, a week going back, literally, this is incredible. The week before, Sunday, my son passed away on Shabbos. The Sunday before, I went to a shiva of a friend, someone I had taught with, who lost a 7-month-old to SIDS in bed. Also, I wasn't at the shiva that long, and it doesn't always happen that you hear this. He described exactly how everything went down, what happened, the Hatzalah police report. So I was prepared, and nothing was surprised. So actually, Motzai Shabbos, we came back from the hospital, and police come. They don't allow the lie to go until the police do a little investigation. Now, I didn't tell my wife, didn't know about this, and it could be traumatizing for someone that the cops show up at your house after your son just died. But I knew it was coming. So I actually directed the cops right upstairs, away from my wife. She didn't even have to see it. I knew they were coming. I was not shooken up by it. I answered their questions, and it was fine. So was incredible in that regard. And then went to the hospital, and there was a social worker. I don't know if they're always there Shabbos afternoon, but there was a young woman there, and she just became available to us on Shabbos afternoon. I'm not sure if Shire Tzedek always has a Shabbos afternoon. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But we were able to sit with her and ask her questions like how we should speak to our kids. And then we had a chance to tell our kids and talk to them, and based on the things she told us. And that's just the beginning. Like, I'm just starting from the beginning of it. So there's so many brachos in that it could have been so much worse, or it could have played out not as smoothly given the tragedy. So those are some examples that go on, and I'm sure in people's life they could think about it. I'll put out one more thing about that. The shloshim in Eretz Yisrael, the hakamas on the teva is very common. Either at the end of the shiva, the shloshim. So we did the hakamas on the teva on the shloshim. The shloshim was the first day that school closed for COVID. And so we got a regular shiva, and people came from America. We had a lot of support. Even the shloshim was fine. And then actually it worked out that we had time, and the family was able to be together, and they were home and whatever. So there was just I hope that helps make it a little bit more concrete.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it's really unbelievably beautiful, and I appreciate you opening up about that. So we're really out of time, and a whole bunch of things that we're gonna have to maybe leave for another time. But I do want to ask you just about your career briefly. The fact that you started your career so late. Some people, when they're younger, they could maybe make it on a call salary for a few years, or a Rebbe salary for a few years, but they think that I need to get on the train now to get my foot in the door, on the career ladder, and it doesn't work that way. If I start teaching and then in my fees or whatever to start transitioning when the financial needs grow. So I'm wondering if you could reflect on your experiences in that regard, and then if you have any advice to others who are maybe considering such a move.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, having family that, again, my parents and in-laws are comfortable. It's not like I could be learning Kol for life. Maybe I would be if they could actually support that, but that's not the situation. But having some sense of support and a little bit of kind of confidence or safety valve that if you go through a difficult time, you have family that can pick you up. That is helpful, and that I have that, and that I want to put that out there. Not everyone has that. So that's one thing to think about it. If you're asking about my specific situation, as I mentioned to you offline about this issue, I'm not here to preach to everyone that just, learn for as long as you can and then go to work. I mean, I've heard people say that, and I've heard lots of stories about how that's worked out one way or another. They got an amazing teaching or a bonus position, even though they were going to go into business eventually. Whatever, everyone's situation is different, but I would say that it is kedai to take as much time as you can full time in learning. Besides everything we said about lechatchila and mulhaza at the beginning of our discussion, the more years you're full time immersed in yeshiva, fully immersed around learning, around rebbeim, the more you could take in as far as hashkafa, as deepening your Torah personality, your commitment, who you are, what your core is. And it was so, so valuable. And I didn't know I was going to go into business at the time, but in retrospect, it was so valuable. And so I would definitely say, don't rush out of yeshiva. The longer you could be in it is every year counts. Every year of that immersion in that environment. And when you're there, immerse yourself. I lived in Washington Heights. For those who know, I lived by the yeshiva. I was learning there 3 sidarim a day. Shabbos, I would go here as much as I could. Immerse yourself as much as you can in yeshiva. Yes, personally, it's worked out. I mean, I've had some up and downs. So I've been in the business world for the last 7.5 years. I've had some challenges actually recently in the last year and a half. Some by choice, just didn't work out in my previous job, and Baruch Hashem, I'm very happy where I am now. But it's not always easy and linear. Like I speaking to a friend of mine, also Big Ben Torah, who's a lawyer, and he said, "Yeah, well, look, I know that the path as a lawyer, I'm eventually going to get here." So I don't remember the context of the conversation, but yeah, there's a certain comfort in that. And it's, hearing that was somewhat like, oh, that'd be nice if I had that all worked out and kind of planned out. But on the other hand, I had this chus of having more years in yeshiva. So I don't think there's a one size fits all here, but I would not underestimate how powerful every single year of full immersion in yeshiva is.
Very nice. Okay, so let's go to our rapid fire. 3 short questions, 3 hopefully short answers. We're in the summer. We have nice long Shabbos afternoons. What do you like to do at that time?
I would love to spend more time learning. The reality is, Baruch Hashem, I have 7 kids at home, and my wife works very hard during the week, as you can imagine, because I'm working hard during the week and trying to balance things. So most of my Shabbos afternoon is spent with a somewhat of a decent nap because I don't sleep much during the week, maybe an hour or so. playing games with my kids, helping my wife take the kids to the park. And if I'm zocha to get some time to learn, it's amazing. Yeah, that's the reality.
Okay, good. What's your favorite sefer to learn or teach?
I didn't prepare for this one well enough. What's my favorite sefer to learn or teach? I've really enjoyed teaching halacha over the years. The Mishnah Brura, and then the Mishnah Brura like Sfarim that they have in Yeridea now with the Badei Shulchan and Chagas Binyamin. I just really love seeing the halacha come into a practical world. So definitely used a lot of those Sfarim in teaching and in my learning.
And if you had to choose a new job tomorrow or today, maybe something you dreamed of as a kid or something you've always had an itch to try out professionally, what would that be?
I guess an answer is not to go into Rabbanos, because that is definitely what I think about frequently and wonder maybe I should even go back to America and go into Rabbanos, or should have gone back at this point. I don't think it's happening. But I really don't have a dream job, to be honest. It's never something that I really dreamed about. And so, I love what my father does as a doctor. But on the other hand, I don't know that I would want the sacrifice that he went through, especially at that stage of his life, go to medical school and everything. I'm sorry, that's a boring answer. But my dream job is to be back in teaching, just full time, really in Rebbeim and being Rebbe in yeshiva. But we're not there yet.
Okay, well, maybe we will stay in touch, and Bezrat Hashem, your dreams should come true, and Hashem's plans for you should lead you to the right places. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for sharing all these experiences and opening up about your, some of the easier times, some of the harder times, and I'm sure the listeners will enjoy it as well.
Okay, thank you, and kol kavod to you for all the work that you do to be mechazik people. And these discussions are so important because it's so easy for everyone who is working to just go by, just go through their day, and to stop and think and reflect, like we spoke about before, is so important. And so giving the forum for that is great. So yashkach, and keep it up.
Thank you so much.